This is KRP, Ken's Random Podcast.
Joining me today on KRP, Ken's Random Podcast, is Fred. Reggie is a business coach. And Fred, the first time I heard business coach, I was like, what a sparkling idea that is, because some people have no idea what the hell they're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's not that they don't know what the hell they're doing. It's just sometimes they just needed someone to guide them through the process. You know, everyone knows how to walk, everyone knows how to run. Sometimes the path has to be pointed to them.
Wow. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what brought this conversation about, first off, we're going to reference a book that Fred has that will be available, what, July 7th, right?
July 7th. Yes.
Okay. And it's, when I saw the title, I was like, tell me how to, and then it's got a whole bunch of other things. Fred, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the title and the subject of the book, obviously.
Well, the title of the book is Tell Me, and the subtitle is How to Initiate and Nurture Meaningful Conversations with Anyone, Anywhere, Anytime. And it's a book that has stemmed from, I guess, somewhat of a lifelong involvement that I've had with communication throughout my professional history, and most recently in working with some clients. I work with a lot of executive clients one-on-one,
Hmm.
and one of the issues that continues to crop up that they would like to work on is communication, and specifically having those difficult conversations with employees or with peers. But also how to initiate a small talk.
Right.
They're in a corporate setting and they're able to do their deliveries and their presentations and whatnot. And then afterwards, they may get together for a dinner, and you might be seated next to the CEO of the company.
Right.
Well, what do I say? What do I say? How to initiate a conversation? And I share with them that there are two words. If you want to start a conversation with anyone, start by saying, tell me.
Hmm.
It's not a question, it's a directive. And when you say, tell me about your work, tell me about your family, tell me about your vacation, tell me how you got started in this business, you're really setting the stage for them to take center stage and make their presentation to you. In the process, you become a more active listener because you've pretty much committed to this conversation.
Right.
I can say, Ken, what do you do? And you can tell me I'm a podcaster. Okay.
Right.
But if I say, tell me about your work, you're likely not to say I'm a podcaster.
Right.
You're likely to say, well, I started out in broadcasting and then I retired, and, I found an interest in people, and things that they had to say and curiosity. And I've developed a podcast to feed that curiosity.
Right. Right.
So it's much more of an engagement and an interaction.
It's, and I may be wrong in saying this, but both you and I tend to be able to initiate a conversation easier than some people I've met. And it's probably because of my past profession in radio. My wife Kathy has often said, "How do you know that much about this person you just met?"
Yeah.
It's just a natural curiosity. I guess I'm a 2-year old. Why?
And that's
Why?
that's the key word. The key word is curiosity.
Right.
Curiosity and intentionality.
Hmm.
We can all be curious about people, but you have to step into that space, and
Yeah.
it's the intentionality that really is the trigger for it.
And what's the other word I'm looking for? Not not compassion, but uh, you're giving your undivided attention to someone when you say, tell me. Because if you say, tell me, and you walk away, that's useless. But saying, tell me, and focusing on them, I think that opens the conversation very much.
Absolutely. Well, it creates an empathy. It really does.
Right.
There's a connection, and a lot of times you'll see people try to initiate a conversation, then they do step away, and
Yeah.
rather than giving full attention. Tell me again is an invitation.
Right.
It's an invitation into that conversation, and it elevates the other person, making them feel valued and seen.
Mm. I have a friend a fellow portrait painter who says he wrote a book. He's got two of them out, I think now, and the first one's called "Tell Me About the Horse," where he interviews people who've got like race horses or
Yeah.
jumpers and stuff. It's a great book, and it was a great invitation. And he's done portraits of the horses. It's
Yeah.
awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
So it's a great line, great line.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that, whenever you can find an opportunity to show interest in other people, that really sets the stage for an interaction. You know, I'm going to take you if you what I'd like to do is to tell you how I came about that.
sure.
And I want to add to that afterwards why we are so hesitant, why I believe we're so hesitant to step into that space. Uh, it was more years than I'd like to remember, but probably about 40 years ago. I'm watching the CBS Evening News. There's a film crew that's covering a Broadway show that had just opened. And it wasn't a long running show. It was going to run maybe 2 or 3 nights. No costume, no orchestra, no set, just 12 to 15 chairs lined across the stage. And in those chairs were 12 to 15 legendary actors
Right.
seated there, passing the microphone around, talking about how they got into the business, how they got into broadcasting, how did they get into theater, how did they get into the movies, what was their inspiration early in life, who were their mentors. And it was very informative. After the show, the film crew went to the backstage door to capture some of these actors and possibly grab an interview. Just to the left of camera view, there were three older women waiting, hoping to catch a glimpse of their favorite. And out of the backstage door stepped James Earl Jones. Now, we all remember James Earl
Yes.
Jones. He, besides that wonderful booming voice he just had a commanding presence about himself.
Yeah.
He was physically in his space. One of these women broke away, rushed up to him, and just started gushing over him. Just, Mr. Jones, you are the greatest actor. I have seen you on Broadway and in the movies and that CNN voice. And she's just gushing and paying all these compliments to him. And Ken, he stopped and he looked at her and he just had the kindest look on his face. And we can visualize it because we've seen him before and,
Sure.
and we know his essence. And he had a kind look on his face and he smiled, extended his hand to her, and he said, "Tell me your name."
Ooh. But
And it was the way he did it. It was like, okay, you're giving me all of these accolades. Now I see you and I want to know who you are.
right,
He didn't say, "What's your name?" He didn't say, "Who are you?" He said, "Tell me your name." He
right,
invited her into his world for a moment.
right.
And that was something that stuck with me all of these years. From that point forward, whenever I would meet someone, I never did say, "Who are you?" or "What's your name?" I always said, "Tell me your name." And as I began to work as a business coach, and this topic kept coming up, this subject kept coming up, and I would use that "tell me" as a way to initiate conversation. And I would get positive feedback from my clients after they would actually put it into practice because it's a pretty simple process. Take these two words, put them in your pocket, and use them whenever you want. There's no workbook that you have to do and no big memory thing.
Right.
And I was getting a lot of positive feedback, both in their corporate setting, how they were engaging in deeper conversations with other people in the company, including top level executives, but also in their family lives. One of my clients told me in our follow up session, he says, "Fred, before we begin, I want to share with you something that happened last week after you and I had the tell me discussion. I went home," he says, "I have a 14-year-old daughter.
Oh,
My daughter usually is, 'How was school today, Jane?' And, it sucked. It was okay." And she goes in her room and I don't see her the rest of the night.
hmm,
I decided, I said, I'm going to try Fred's technique.
okay.
She's walking through the room. He says, I say, "Jane, tell me about your day at school." He said, "Fred," she stopped. She turned around. She came. She sat on the sofa next to me, and we had a 15-minute conversation.
Wow, wow.
He He says we've never had a 15-minute conversation. And she told me about things that happened, a science project she was working on, something funny that happened, in one of her classes with one of her classmates. And and it was just a powerful moment that we had.
Right.
And it validated the whole tell me proposition.
I wish I'd have heard this about 50 years ago when I asked my daughter, "How was school today?" Boring,
Yeah,
boring,
it's a one
boring.
word answer.
That was
Yeah,
it. And that's the last I saw her till 9 o'clock that night. So
yeah.
it's great that it even works at all of those levels. It works at the corporate level, the entertainment level, and most importantly, at home. I think it's a great communication tool. So the book will come out July 7th. It will be available, I assume, on Amazon and
It
everywhere else.
will. It will. And what your listeners can do, if they go to fredreggie.com/book,
Right.
it'll take them to a page. They can sign up to be notified when the book is released on launch day. You'll be able to buy it at a substantial discount that day. So
Cool.
if they do that, they'll be on the list and we'll notify them just the day before and the day of. So they'll be sure to be able to purchase the book at a discount.
Are you going to do an audio version of that?
I am. I'm in the process of doing it now. Whenever my voice holds up, I'll sit
Well,
down and record a chapter or two.
when you mentioned James Earl Jones, I could think, tell me your name. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
you
yeah,
automatically want to do that.
yeah,
But we
yeah.
we will tell them more about the book. I will post the address and things like that. But I have to tell them about what started this conversation as well. I see Fred on Facebook all the time, and I said, "Man, I got to talk to Fred. I haven't talked to him in a while." I went to a business establishment Thursday or Friday of last week to pick up some goods that Kathy bought through some sort of coupon kind of online thing. And we're not going to mention the business. I would not do that to them because this may have just been one particular incident. But I walked in the place and the lady says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm here to pick up an order that my wife, Kathy, said would be ready." And she looked at me kind of confused. And without missing a beat, she says, "Are you sure you're in the right location? Because we have a location in Baton Rouge." And of course, the first thing was, how insulting. Just because I look like I might be over 40 doesn't mean I didn't know I was not going to Baton Rouge, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was enough. And then the person who actually spoke to my wife after 10 minutes or so of conversation, she comes up and she says, "Well, I talked to this lady, but I didn't get her name. She never said her name." And immediately my mind's going, "You lie." Because I was standing next to Kathy when she said, "My husband Ken will be going by to pick this up." And
Yeah.
after, another 2 or 3 minutes of futzing around with things in the place, she says, "Oh, I think, yeah, I think I remember." And she pulls out what I wanted. Why did I waste 10 minutes of time? Because somebody didn't asked the right question. I felt insulted. It was an ageism thing. And then somebody lying to me. What did that whole corporate or non-corporate structure do incorrectly?
Well, it starts at the top, Ken, and we see it more and more. There's a complacency about customer service that exists, and it's sadly it's getting worse
Yes.
because and I address this in my book when we talk about how we have become cocooned in our communication.
Mm,
We started out, if you go way back to the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century, people used to sit on their porches, their stoops. They'd visit with their neighbors, people walking by on the sidewalk. There was more person-to-person interaction. And then Henry Ford decides he wants to invent the automobile and give us a capsule that we can enclose ourselves in and just blow past people at 20, 25 miles an hour and totally ignore them and not interact with them.
yeah,
So we get into that isolated cocoon, if you will. Then to exacerbate that, radio comes out. That pulls the family off of the porch, off of the stoop, into the
right.
living room, sitting around listening to those soap operas and whatnot that they presented back in the 20s on radio. Then television, another detractor where everyone's sitting in the room looking in one direction and not looking and interacting with one another. Computers come along, smartphones come along, then everyone becomes isolated and insulated in their own behind the glass world, and it has replaced interpersonal communication. So there's a lack of awareness that comes with that because social media, texting, just the obsession with looking at your laptop or your pad or your smartphone becomes a very self-centered behavior. We're looking for the dopamine hit. We're looking for a like on something that we
Right.
posted. And I think, every generation is guilty of it to some degree. Younger generations are certainly more connected to it because that's the world that they've been raised in. So, that being said, the intentionality that we talked about is absent. When you walked into that establishment, or what, better yet, I'll go back when Kathy called that establishment, the world should have stopped in the moment and all of the attention directed to what Kathy was saying. What
Right.
was she ordering? How was the interaction? Repeating the order back to make sure that you got it right, making Kathy feel like a valued customer in that space, not just someone who was placing a call on the phone. And look, a lot of places now you go on, there's an app for a lot of these places where you
Sure.
just you just order it online and you never come in contact with a real person.
Yes.
So that's the beginning of something getting lost in the mix.
Yeah.
Then you walk in and you're I think with the comment that that young lady made to you, I presume it was a young lady, I think you said,
Yes.
that the comment that she made to you was kind of just I don't want to say an airhead, just a lack of awareness,
Right.
like, but she didn't put two and two together. Like, this is in Lafayette. Why would I even suggest that this person confused our store with something in Baton Rouge?
Right. Right.
So it's that level of sensitivity, that level of awareness, that level of engagement that's missing. And then when the woman who actually took the order didn't remember your wife's name or didn't write it down, so she just say she didn't give it to me.
Right. Right.
It's that's an easy out.
Right. But when I spoke to her, it dawned on me it was late in the day. She may have been at work since I don't know what time, and it was a long day standing. And I walked in with an off the wall question, and her first answer was, "You may be in the wrong town," right? I understand
Right.
that. And the second one, I can understand. She was probably ready to get the heck off that shift, and yeah, whatever. But there's too much of that whatever, I think, in young people when they're working behind the counter. And as I mentioned to you, there's a couple of places I go to, and it drives me nuts when they take your money, they give you your change and receipt, and that's it.
Yeah.
Say thank you. You paid my salary. But I go into so many places, and it's like, yeah, here you go. Have a good one. Have a good one has replaced thank you. I understand that.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I like it. I'm going to have a good one because I got the hell out of your business.
Yeah, we've just become too casual in our encounters and again, unintentional.
Right.
We just don't put any thought into it to where, I've always said that whatever business you're in, when someone meets you and encounters you, that encounter should be the best thing that happens to that person that day. That should be the motive for your business. When someone calls me, I want that phone call to be the best encounter engagement that they've had all day.
My parents would have, let's say, been a bit upset with me if I did not respond correctly to customers. My dad had a shoe repair shop on the north side of Lafayette. And
Hmm.
when people came in, whether it was $2 or $100, I had to say, thank you, please come again.
Sure.
That's something it was built into me. And I know that you, the Reggie family, that's the sort of upbringing you had.
My father, who was a Lebanese immigrant, came to this country in 1920 at the age of 5. And in 1933, at the age of 18, he opened a single pump Shell service station in Crowley. And at 18 years old, in Crowley, with a service station, he actually had letterhead printed for his service station, Reggie Service Station. And a number of years ago, I ran across some letters when he was courting my mother.
Courting.
And
What a
for those of you who don't know what courting is, that was the swipe right and swipe left of the day. Okay. So when he was courting my mother, she would go up to Shreveport in the summer and spend a month with a relative up there. And they would write letters back and forth. And I found some of the letters that my dad had written on his Reggie's service station letterhead. And they were very nice. And it was kind of an update of what was going on in Crowley. And he'd finish off with a little sweet note to her. And it wasn't until I had read about three of those letters that I realized under his letterhead, Ken, was a tagline. And the tagline was, "We serve to serve again." He didn't want to just put gas in your car. He wanted you to come back and fill up again. He wanted you to buy tires, a battery, get a tune up, get your radiator checked, all of that stuff. Okay. And his approach to business was be intentional in the service that you give to your customers
yes.
because you want them coming back. That's you're here for them. You're not here for them just for a single fill up and never see them again, unless they're just passing through town, right? And you
Right,
won't see them
right.
again. But you want it to be intentional. You want to be memorable for the level of service and attention that you've given them.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's missing in a lot of businesses today. Then look, there's some businesses that focus on that customer service approach
Sure.
and they execute in a phenomenal fashion. But you and I both know, and I'm sure your listeners will agree, that there are so many places that you go where you feel invisible.
Right.
I'll give you an example, Ken. A
Okay.
few weeks ago, my wife and I were in Houston. We went to the Galleria, and they have a lot of high-end stores. Louis Vuitton, Ferragamo, Neiman Marcus, and I made it a point to observe as we were walking through the Galleria, and you can see into the stores. 90%, at least 90% of the salespeople in the stores were looking at a smartphone.
Ooh.
They were all looking down. And I waited a few minutes until a customer walked in, and it wasn't until the customer was within about 3 or 4 feet that they put it down and looked up.
Yeah.
Walked through every department in Neiman Marcus and saw virtually the same thing. And the attachment, the security that goes with carrying one of these smartphones and just having access to it 24/7 is a false sense of security that has pulled us away from that personal engagement.
Right. A lot of people don't value personal engagement because they don't know what the heck it is. Mom works, dad works two jobs or something like that. And as we grow as a population, there are no more Reggie service stations. Now it's a mega everything. It's like Bucky's. It's like
Yeah,
when you go to Bucky's, it's
yeah,
a big place, but
yeah,
yet their people are trained, they are friendly, they're attentive,
yep,
and you won't see a cell phone in anybody's hand because they know the
right,
customer is important. I think
right.
it's great. I
Because
think.
Bucky's has set a standard.
Right.
Okay, a service standard. And if you look outside of Bucky's, there's a sign out there that shows all the pay scales of what people get paid. The person who cleans the restroom gets paid $40,000 a year, no experience necessary. Okay,
Man.
$40,000 a year. So they value the employees, and I'm sure that they instill in the employees how important it is to value the customers who enable them to be able to be paid that amount of money
Right.
for the work that they do. And it shows every encounter that you have in Bucky's with an employee since you brought them up. That's one of my favorite places to stop. I've got to get a pulled pork sandwich every time we every time we
Fred,
go through.
that and beaver nuggets. Oh
Yeah,
my.
I don't do the beaver nuggets, but I definitely do the pulled pork sandwich, which I love. So it's just a matter of being intentional because the service that we need, the service that we require, does not cost anything.
No, it does not. It's just
It costs time. You have to spend time teaching that concept to your employees. But
right.
once it's put in place and put into practice, then it becomes second nature.
Absolutely. Well, Fred, I appreciate the time today and thank you for enlightening me about how customer relations are going these days and how they can be improved. And I want to remind our listeners that if you go to Fred's website, which is fredreggie.com, you can find out about his business coaching. If you need business coaching, I highly recommend this man because he knows business and he can communicate with you and your employees. So do that and look for the book. It's coming out July 7th.
Thank you so much for hosting me today. It's been a pleasure, and I hope I brought some value to your audience.
Go out and buy the book, buy 2 or 3 copies, and Fred will probably autograph them, maybe, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll do that.
KRP, a random production of Ken Romero.